Welcome to the people who are tuning in right now to Manny's Super Civic Cyber Conversations. I'm so excited for this conversation. Been waiting for it for a while and lots to talk about. For those who don't know, Manny's is a physical gathering space in the Mission District in San Francisco. We had to shut down, unfortunately, because of the shelter in place. But just because the physical place is closed does not mean that the work of civically engaging our public is over. We have work to do. So we decided to build this online series, and today you are in it. You are a part of it. And so I want to thank you, whoever you are, for joining. And if you don't mind raising your hand, there's a little button that it's a hand raise button. I'd love to see who's here and just kind of get a sense of who's in the audience. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Please keep raising your hands. Thank you. If you like what you're hearing, or if you don't like what you're hearing, you can tag us at Welcome to Manny's at any time. And if you have a question for George on the topic or on anything, you can type that question into the Q&A box at any time. This is a 30-minute program. We're going to talk for 15, 20 minutes, and then we're going to get to your questions. All right, is everyone ready? I can't hear you, but I'm just going to hope that you are. George, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Fabulous. Your name is George Jacob.
Yeah.
You are a man of mystery to me. I'm so interested in what you do.
I plan and design museums. So that has been my vocation for many years now.
How does one find that vocation? I mean, it's such a specific thing to do. How did you get into this?
Well, somebody's got to do it. But I graduated with the museum studies background. And I was always interested in the establishment of new museums. So rather than working in an established museum, I was more interested in the design build side of the industry. Mm-hmm. So I kind of focused more on establishing, master planning, designing museums.
What do you think makes a successful museum experience?
I think the bottom line is that as long as it resonates either with the people or with its mission, that's the definition of success. If it can inspire a generation, that is success times 2. If it is timeless and inspires more generations than one, and you can actually see the fruits of what the museum does for them and their lives, I think that's times 3.
Well, so right now we have, I'm just trying to like lay out the architecture, and I'm going to ask you just so you know about where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. But I feel like, let's put zoos aside for a second. I feel like with museums, you've got art museums. Actually, no, let's bring the zoos back. In terms of these like physical places that people go to learn and kind of be acculturated, you have your art museums, and you've got, your classic art, your modern art, your contemporary art. You have your places with animals in them. So you've got your aquariums and your zoos and your, I don't know, parrot jungle in Florida kind of thing. And then you have like educational institutions that maybe are like, they don't have art in them, but they're like places where you go and you like grow and learn, kind of like Cal Arts and Sciences, the Exploratorium, these places that are like maybe more about seeing and doing and learning. Can you tell me, 1, did I miss anything? And then 2, kind of how have you seen the evolution of these spaces from when you began in this industry, and I know you've been in it for a while, to where we are now?
So a long time ago, they started with libraries. So right. In 2nd BC, the library in Alexandria was deemed to be the first of its kind, first museum. And then after the World Expo in 1857, the Crystal Palace exhibit became a museum. And then each year, wherever the expo happened, there was a clamor for preserving some of the collections. And then from the collections, they kind of grew as institutions of learning, and they had activities and outreach efforts and so on and so forth. And from being passive sources of learning, they became more interactive. From interactive sources of learning, they became more immersive. Mm-hmm. And with immersive sources comes the entire family of AR, VR, and all the cyber curation that you can think of.
So the museum, as we kind of maybe think to know it, is really like an invention of the last 150 years. Is that what I hear right from you?
In modern terms, yes. But if you look at their fundamental function as learning institutions, they've been in existence for a very long time.
Right.
So it started off as cabinet of curiosities. You would keep a three-headed snake or five-legged cow,
Mm-hmm.
and you had the mishmash of curios. And then eventually, once the curatorship process became more sophisticated, the interpretive planning became more sophisticated. You had museums as formalized institutions of public learning.
And what about the kind of museum-like place that you find yourself in the Bay Area, which is in the aquarium and kind of aquatic side of things? When did aquariums really start to become a thing? What's the oldest aquarium out there? Or what was the first aquarium?
One of the first aquariums was in New Zealand, in Auckland. And interestingly, the Aquarium of the Bay is modeled after that particular aquarium. And there were 3 aquariums built in California that were modeled after the New Zealand model. And when it started here in San Francisco, it was a for-profit organization called the Underwater World. It became a nonprofit about 10, 11 years ago. And then it changed its name to Aquarium of the Bay. It became a nonprofit.
Got it. I have to tell you, George, when I was in grade school, I was in Jewish school. I don't remember how old I was, but I went on a trip to the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and it totally blew my mind. I mean, I remember it so vividly, and going to the petting pools, and then we went to some tidal pools and an octopus wrapped around my hand. And I'm 30 years old now, and I still remember that moment so well, and having so much wonder, and like, I can't believe there's an octopus, and it peed on me, and I was like, everyone laughed, and it totally, it excited me so much. And so I want to ask you a little bit about the utility of these spaces, especially as it relates to inspiring young people, kind of what you see in your work actually running and creating all these museum spaces, all over the place.
Well, specifically aquariums, Aquarium of the Bay has been sort of a boutique aquarium for the last 24 years. And you observe all kinds of people fascinated by just the wonder of what the oceans offer in terms of biodiversity, aquatic life, and how these species interact with each other. That has endless wonder. And especially when you see little babies, they stop crying and they're so fascinated by what's going on, especially in our tunnels. So that is quite a gratifying sight. But post wonder, I think, what really hits home is our engagement with this amazing biodiversity. What are we doing as a species to either make their lives more difficult, or how are we actually helping turn the tide, pun intended, so that we have a better world that we live in, especially now with the Earth Day approaching next week. That is very much on many people's minds.
Right. So I'm going to get tough with you a little bit, okay? I'm going to ask some tough questions. First, let's start with museums. I feel like, especially in my generation, people like to go to museums, but I do feel like there's a sense that the traditional museum, if you walk into a big white building and you just stare at a painting for a while, and then you sit on a bench, maybe you get a cappuccino and you leave. I feel like people are starting to get kind of bored of that. Do you feel like the traditional art museum model is shifting, and do you think it has to shift in order to stay relevant?
It is shifting. It is significantly shifting. There is some value in the classical. There is no substitute for that sort of a presence. They are collective repositories of memory, collective repositories of talent, culture, heritage. So they have a sort of a sanctity which is important in the conventional sense. What is happening more and more is that they're seeking new audiences.
Right.
They want relevance. They want to resonate with a younger audience, and the younger audiences are increasingly getting impatient. They have this device at their fingertips where curated information is presented to them at lightning speeds. So they don't really have the patience to wait for 18 months for a curated show to appear in a gallery. They'd rather look at it now.
Hmm.
So I think those are some of the basic challenges that the museums are facing, the conventional museums are facing,
Hmm.
as they embrace new audiences and they look to new sources of revenue.
How do you see, let's move to the organic world. I have two questions about both zoos and aquariums. And I imagine looping the two things together is a mistake. So if it is, please correct me. But one, I feel like aquariums and zoos attract families, but like how do you get, first of all, like is that true? Do you see like are your attendees typically, young adults, children and parents? And if that is true, how do you attract like, the folks who are 20 to 40?
Right. So museums, you have the nonprofit aquariums, for example, and then you have the for-profit aquariums that are owned and run by companies like Merlin. And some of them are located inside shopping malls, or they are in multi-use hubs where there is commercial activity all around them, and the
Hmm.
aquarium becomes a byproduct of a captive audience,
Hmm.
be it Legoland or some of those other locations.
Right.
But the the classical aquariums like the Shedd Aquarium or the Georgia Aquarium or the Frost Aquarium in Florida and so on, they have a larger purpose. I mean, there is of course, they hold 1 million gallons to get 2 million gallons of salt water. They also have freshwater tanks. They also have terrestrial species so that they co-link the coexistence of all life forms, and they kind of tell a bigger story, be
Hmm.
it a story about climate, be it a story about carbon sequestration, sea level rise, or ocean acidification, or microplastics, and
Hmm.
how our intervention has created problems or solved problems for the next generation. So I think the storylines are shifting
Hmm.
in terms of how to attract a younger generation, which is a little bit more tech savvy. Aquariums are resorting to a few interesting things. There are fun activities where you can actually doodle on a screen, and that pops up as a live animal that floats or swims. There are outreach activities where you use this sort of a Zoom method of classroom-based teaching
Hmm.
that makes it more affordable and more quick. You can actually collate it with multiple sites
Yeah.
in the Pacific or in the Far East and so on and so forth. And then there is this immersive medium of virtual reality and sometimes combined with augmented reality that allows for a different experience, a different
Right.
kind of experience. So we do have an AR platform that we use at the aquarium in Pier 39,
Cool.
and it allows you interactions with polar bears, with harbor seals, and dinosaurs for that matter.
Amazing. I have three more questions if you'll allow it. And then if for anyone that's tuning in, if you have a question for George Jacob, the international man of aquarium mystery, you can type it into the Q&A now. I want to talk about the treatment of animals. Is there a way to inspire the same set of wonder and experience the natural world without having to keep all these animals in these cages? I mean, it can't be comfortable even for the fish to like, be in these small boxes. And I always feel like I enjoy going to the zoo and to aquarium, but then I feel bad for these animals that are like stuck in tiny boxes. You know what I mean?
Right. So I think that question is one of the eternal questions that have made aquariums and zoos adapt to spatial challenges. They're also acutely conscious of um, protecting, preserving, and conserving um, uh, the biodiversity, and especially bringing it to you and I so that we are more aware of the challenges that some of these animals face
Right.
outside of the protected premise.
Yeah.
In many of these organizations, these are rescue animals. So they've been rescued from
Ah,
fire or from a polluted environment.
ah.
So it becomes a safe haven for some of those species.
I didn't know that. I thought that they were like plucked from the wild from their mama. I didn't realize that there are a lot of safe animals. Well, that's good to know. I wish it's good that I know that. The Bay Ecotarium. Holy shit. I mean, like, what is this thing? I had no idea this was a thing, George. I didn't know it was a thing. I didn't know it was going to happen. I didn't know what it looked like. First of all, it's gorgeous. Like, as someone who designed spaces, not me, you, it's just like, I'm going to be so proud of it when it's up in the Bay. So tell us about the Bay Ecotarium. Um, yeah, tell us about it. Like, what is it? What's the plan? When is it going to get built? And what's it going to look like?
So Bay.org, or Bay Aquarium as we call it now, has 6 branches. So Aquarium of the Bay is one of them. The Sea Lion Center, the Bay Institute, Studio Aqua, and the Bay Academy are some of the branches of Bay.org. About 3 years ago, we decided to do a master plan to rethink the Aquarium of the Bay, which is, as you know, a bit dated, and it has its challenges, both physical challenges and it has functional challenges and operational challenges as well. So we decided to rethink out of the box a solution that could address a number of things. There you go. That's the vision for the new center. And we came up with this climate and ocean conservation living ecotarium, which hosts and accommodates the Aquarium of the Bay at its core. So currently the aquarium holds 750,000 gallons of salt water. That would be up to 1.5 million gallons, 2 million gallons. And then there is a lecture space and so on and so forth. This is going to completely transform the skyline of San Francisco for the right reasons. It'll position the city as a champion for climate, ocean conservation. It has a mandate of providing free education to more than 250,000 children a year. It has some of the best minds in the world as our ambassadors and advisors, including Dr. Sylvia Earle, NASA astronaut Dr. Yvonne Kegel, and the guru of emergency medicine, Dr. Paul Auerbach. It has some of the best minds in the world working on it, some of the best designers from Germany, France, and Japan working on the core content and the immersive environments that are going to be inside the center. The interesting part about this center is that it uses Native American voices. There are about 96 tribes that have lived in the Bay Area for centuries. And some of their voices and some of their indigenous practices for environmental stewardship have never seen the foreground of this sort of leadership. So grounding that story in the Bay Area is really critical to us. And using some of those voices to talk about conservation and environmental sustainability, especially as DG goals 14, 13, 17, and 19, that focus on environmental justice. Those are sort of key elements of this premise. The building itself is a LEED Platinum building. It's designed like a combination of Poloni shell mounts and the ocean geometry and fish scales. So it's got that iridescence. And geometry allows us to construct this edifice as a prefab. So those of whom you're looking right behind where I'm sitting, this is sort of the building that you can see at the back of where I'm sitting. You get a sense of how this building is laid out.
Cool.
Between Piers 35 and 39.
So will it be where the existing Aquarium of the Bay is, or is this a new space?
It's the existing space, but the footprint expands a little eastward.
I see. So are you going to demolish the current aquarium to build this one?
Parts of it. So the periphery of the current aquarium will be demolished. The tunnels, the classical tunnels that we have will remain with this life support system. And the canopies, the shells will actually gird it or cover it.
I see. And how close, like, what stage are you guys in? Clearly the space has been designed. Has it been funded? Has construction begun? Like, what stage are you at?
So on October 5th, 2018, we unveiled this design to the public for the first time. Mrs. Biden, Jill Biden, was here for the opening ceremony.
Amazing.
Of the unveiling ceremony of the design. And subsequent to that, we've actually held about 130 public and private presentations to solicit community input. And we've received some really valuable input from our neighborhood groups and other community organizations. We've received some great support from SFSU, from UC Berkeley, and from Stanford, and some of the other organizations.
Great.
And we are now in the permitting process. So the process is likely going to take about 18 months. And subsequent to that, we hope that we can start working on the actual construction, fabrication of exhibits and the shell.
Amazing. This is my last question, and it's about kind of bringing us to today, George. You know, we may be reopening the city soon, of course, with lots of restrictions. You run many spaces, I think six, that are all kind of about gathering, you know, in person. And so, how are you thinking about this? Are you nervous? Are you worried about the future and the sustainability of these important spaces in our city's life, given that, you know, we may be seeing 6 to 12 months of people not wanting to gather in person in large groups anymore?
No, that's certainly a concern. As you know, that the American Alliance of Museums canceled their San Francisco 2020 Expo.
No.
Parts of it will go virtual, but the physical sort of gathering of 5,000 professionals or 8,000 professionals, I think.
Where was it going to be?
It was largely at Moscone Center between May 17th and 21st.
Damn.
So May 17th is the International Museum Day. So I think now that entire focus will be virtual. So I think most museums, and some of you may know that San Francisco has 55 museums. And yeah, it has about 55 museums, and together they attract about 10 million people, 10 times the population of the city. And San Francisco as a city attracts 23 million to 25 million tourists a year. So museums are real anchors of tourism-based economy. They are anchors of augmented education, and they are anchors of employment. So both during construction, post-construction. So I think there is a concern about dipping numbers. We are going to see some shifts in the way the museums manage some of their operations with minimum resources. You may have read in the Chronicle that there have been layoffs at the Aquarium or Cal Academy, and we are not exempt from that either. We've had to lay off 70% of our staff.
Wow.
Open, it'll be a phased sort of an increased staffing level. But the proximity of visitors once we open is a concern. So our teams have put together a protocol of how the operations will be managed, how health and safety will be taken care of, both for our own staff and for the visitors. And then we are shifting a lot of our activities online. So education programs, teaching programs, and some of those fun activities will shift online.
Got it. My final question is, I heard that the otters are sad. What's going on with the otters? Are they sad?
The otters are still playful. We have 4 siblings, and they spend a lot of time sleeping. So they sleep about 16 hours a day.
That's a lot.
But when they wake up, they are little dynamos. They're very, very active. So we have river otters. As you know, the Monterey Bay Aquarium has sea otters. We have river otters. So it's fun and frolic when they're awake. So,
but I heard that they're sad that there's no people around. Is that true?
Well, our animal care team's trying to keep them busy and engaged with new toys and new places where their food is kept. And so they try to exercise their minds a little bit and bodies a little bit too.
Okay, let's get to some of these questions. Thank you for answering mine. Jess asks, what do you think is the biggest threat to the sustainability and future of museums?
The biggest threat is relevance. So, you know, for museums to be viable, they have to be relevant to the demographic that they serve. And relevance is tied, one, to the qualitative aspect of learning and education and enriching your soul and getting inspired. But on the quantitative side, you know, the dollars and cents take center stage. And museums, as you know, not all of them have good endowments. A rainy day like a forest fire or COVID exposes that vulnerability of museums. And they have to rethink their business model. They have to rethink on how they engage with the communities. They also have to rethink the kind of voices that they have, either with city administration or with the county. Because, you know, most cities and counties have a travel association or a travel-based promotion organization like SF Travel in San Francisco and Visit California and Sacramento. that takes care of promoting travel. But the voices for museums need a special place, especially the nonprofits,
Yeah.
because sometimes the conversation focuses mostly on hotels and motels and some of the allied sectors, and museums don't get that same sort of a bandwidth.
Got it. David Henke asks, what are your thoughts for the future of hands-on experience for tactile exhibits that you find in science and children's museums?
So I think tactility is a great part of learning. All the five senses contribute to the learning processes.
That octopus on my hand, remember? I'm never going to forget it.
Indeed. So the suction cups and, all of those things are so memorable that it kind of touches your core. And especially children are fearless, especially between 6 and 9. They will touch and feel all their surfaces, and that's how they imbibe knowledge, and that's how they associate with their environments. So I think there is no substitute for those sensory inputs. And institutions like the Exploratorium that offer wonderful tactile experiences or multisensory experiences will be here as long as we are relishing childhood environments and childhood inputs. Of course, the biggest threat, of course, is what is happening in the cyber world. More and more children, especially this particular generation, is the screen age generation. They have not grown without a screen in front of their faces. So their sense of what is real and what is virtual is increasingly getting blurred.
That's so sad. I hate it. I think it's destroying us. Sangeeta asks, the Association of Zoos and Aquariums has a bunch of guidelines for zoos and aquariums on enclosure sizes, ethical treatment of animals, etc. Do you believe that these guidelines are enough? And if not, what do you think needs to improve?
I think the guidelines are very comprehensive. There is a very, very capable team at AZA that crafts and discusses and solicits input before some of these guidelines are made part of the accreditation process. We are accredited by the AZA. There are 35 aquariums and zoos that are accredited by the AZA. And the process is really stringent. It's a very thorough vetting process, and it's very stringent. And there are subsequent reviews even after you get the accreditation. Mm-hmm. So, and the professionals on the other side also take it very seriously. Okay. And they follow some of these guidelines and practices very, very seriously.
So, okay, I think we have time for one more question, my friend, and it's from, oh my God, wait a second. Melissa says that if anyone wants to check out the river otters romp and play, you can view them through our live webcam. Melissa, where's this webcam? Can you type in the question? Or George, where's this otter webcam?
So Melissa Schwest is our Director of Animal Care.
Hey, Melissa.
And she is, she's been at the aquarium for many years, and she and her team have been really, really good all through the COVID crisis. They have been here 24/7, taking care of a very large number of animals and 186 species that we have.
Damn. Hey, Sam, can you find the otter webcam and put it in the chat box, please? Thank you. Randy asks, last time I looked, many of the newest and most remarkable modern museums are located in the Middle East. Which museums in the United States would you recommend visiting that would represent the best of what to expect in the future? Ooh, interesting question.
Middle East, three comments. Saudi Arabia has the Museum of World Cultures. Dubai has, of course, Ferrari World, and some of the, most recently, the Museum of the Future that is coming up in Dubai. It was supposed to make a debut at the Expo 2020 that got postponed. But that is a phenomenal 3D printed, massive setup. It is worth a visit.
3D printed museum?
Yeah, the building is 3D printed. It's a very sophisticated project.
That's crazy. What's it called?
The Museum of the Future.
Oh my God, I can't wait to look it up.
Yeah, and then of course the Saadiyat Island has 6 phenomenal museums, about $300 million a piece. So yes, some of the finest and the best museums are coming up in Doha, Qatar, and other places. And in the US, of course, the museum movement has been on a slightly slower pace. But there are some interesting museums that are coming up in New York and Seattle and elsewhere, focused on popular culture and some of the other unusual topics. And with the time, they'll continue to evolve. George Lucas is setting up as we speak, the Museum of the Narrative Art in Los Angeles. That is going to be phenomenal when it opens. And the other museum that is about to come up is the Oscars Academy of Motion Pictures
Oh
Museum.
yeah, I saw them. I saw the space for it. I'm from LA, and I saw the building that they chose. And then there's also there's that big art museum that the Waltons are building, isn't it? Aren't they?
Yes, the Walton's Art Museum is called the Crystal Bridges Museum. That was designed in Bentonville by architect Moshe Safdie.
Mm-hmm.
And that has been around for a while. But again, it is a campus, a phenomenal campus that accommodates both classical and contemporary arts.
Can I tell you what museum I've always wanted to go to, but I've never been able to?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to tell you two things. I'm going to tell you my favorite museum that I've ever been to, and then the museum that I've always wanted to go to, but I haven't been to, okay? My favorite museum that I've been to, and I'm obsessed with, is the Victoria and Albert Museum. I love the Victoria and Albert Museum, which will kind of reveal a little bit about me, but I just think it's so gorgeous. And they open it up on Friday nights, and they play live music in the courtyard. And I met this amazing guy in the Raphael room. Have you ever been in the Raphael room?
Yes.
Ah, it's so amazing.
Yes.
And I forget his name, but he was also amazing. Anyway, that was the Victoria and Albert. The museum I've always wanted to go to, but I've never been, is the Milwaukee Art Museum, because I love Calatrava and I want to see the bird. Can you tell people about the Milwaukee Art Museum?
Right. So the Santiago Calatrava is a master of architectural geometry. And of course, the bird is a phenomenal, unique institution. It actually contributes to kinetic sculpture.
Mm-hmm.
And you see some of the similar Calatrava installations in Toronto and also in Spain.
Oh yeah. No, yeah, in Spain.
Yeah.
No, Bill, but I think I'm messing it up. Anyway, I want to ask you two hard questions. What's your favorite museum to visit that you're not responsible for? And what's your favorite marine animal in the aquarium?
Well, I like the seven-gill sharks. They have not evolved in millions of years, and I'm fascinated by watching them. And my favorite museum is actually where I've not been involved with.
That's not one of your museums, George.
I saw a very small museum. Of course, the big ones, of course, are there. You have the Bilbao by the Guggenheim, by Frank Gehry, and then you have the Louis Vuitton Museum by Frank Gehry outside of Paris, and of course the Louvre. There are so many of those big ones that are interesting and fantastic. But some years ago, I was in Zagreb, in Croatia, and I saw a very small museum called the Museum of Broken Relationships. And what made that museum special was, of course, the smallness and the intimacy of the size. But what was interesting was the curation process. So it was a story of broken relationships, not just between two people, but also with neighborhoods, with communities, with balkanization, with war, how it has broken up communities and neighbors for generations. And those stories are told in very personalized voices, sometimes with a tinge of humor, sometimes with a tinge of sadness. But it did leave a lasting impression on me. So sometimes, budgets alone don't equate to the resonance.
Right. Well, George, this is the end of our time. I just want to point to the folks who are tuning in. If you go to the chat, there is a GoFundMe in the chat to help the Aquarium of the Bay care for its marine life, help support our marine life, help Melissa do her amazing work. We've also included the Twitch to watch the otters play from 10 to noon every day. You can watch the otters play. And finally, I do want to make a request that you go into the chat box and click on joinit.org/o/Manny's to become a sponsor of Manny's. I am 12 sponsors away from my big goal of how many sponsors we wanted to get in order to sustain our space. 12 away, so I really hope, I love making my goal, and we need 12 more. It's $36 a month. You can go to joinit.org/o/Manny's, or you can go in the chat box. The link is there. I want to thank my staff, my amazing staff, Jupiter, Ram, and Sam is the operator on this call. I want to thank you all for tuning in on this Friday evening to hear from one of the treasures of San Francisco, George Jacob, and also he's a treasure because he runs the treasures of our city. If you haven't gone to the Aquarium of the Bay, go. If you're willing to donate or become a partner or sponsor to the Bay Ecotarium, go to bay.org. It's really exciting and interesting. And be a doer, be a supporter, and help allow future kids like me when I was a be inspired by octopuses and all that, octopi. And that's it. George, do you have any final words?
No, thank you so much for making this happen. I'm sure we'll have more questions. Please log on to our website. It is very simple, bay.org or bayecotarium.org or aquariumofthebay.org.
All right.
We'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and have a wonderful weekend as much as you can.
Bye-bye.
Bye.